They let her know this was a private session, closed to the public. No recording devices, no journalists, and no live broadcast. Just a pale envelope slipped under her office door in the early hours of that weekday dawn. The seal was from the country's highest court. No signature, no sender's name, only 7 bold words printed clearly. Attendance compulsory, no lawyer permitted. Jasmine Crockett stared at the envelope for nearly 2 full moments before tearing it open. It was unlike any legislative invitation she'd ever received. The wording felt vague, almost deliberately so, but the location was crystal clear. Room 303, Ancient Highest Judicial Hall, 9:00 a.m. that day. Topic: investigation of legal wrongdoing. Private meeting, legal wrongdoing. She wasn't a judge, and there hadn't been any prior notice of any punitive action against her. Yet, the phrasing was ambiguous enough to hint at something threatening, while still skirting legality. She looked up at the photo of her dad hanging over her desk, the same one taken with him outside the local courthouse the day she passed the bar exam. She whispered softly, "If I don't show up, they'll say I ran away. If I do go, they better be ready for me." That morning at 8:57, room 303 felt colder than expected. Not temperature-wise. The atmosphere was cool in a way that a space feels when no one wants you there. 9 seats were already filled, arranged in a half circle, with pressed suits and blank expressions. In the center, Chief Justice John Roberts leaned forward, fingers laced, his face serious. Clarence Thomas sat to his left, Samuel Alito to his right. The rest, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, Barrett, Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson, formed an arc of solemnity that represented the weight of U.S. legal authority. Before them stood an empty chair. No table, no microphone, no refreshments, just that chair, metallic and plain, exactly 7 feet away from the closest judge. The message was clear. This was not about dialogue. It was about opposition. No court reporter, no aide, no official record kept. The door clicked shut behind her. Legislator Jasmine Crockett, Roberts said without standing, "Do you believe in the rule of law?" He didn't smile, didn't blink, and didn't pause. The question hit hard, not meant to elicit an answer, but to declare that this was their court, their rules. Crockett hesitated before replying. She sat down slowly, placed her hands on her knees, then glanced not just at Roberts, but at the entire group. "I believe in the law. That's why I'm here." 3 weeks earlier, a secret meeting had taken place in a private room at a government retreat in a historic town. No staff, no media, no agenda. Just 3 people. John Roberts, Clarence Thomas, and Samuel Alito. They weren't concerned about offense levels or foundational legal principles, but rather a name that was starting to stand out in both legal and political circles. Jasmine Crockett. She had been asking the wrong questions at the wrong times. Questions about financial disclosures, foreign holdings, material distributions, and conflicts of interest. But more importantly, she had captured the public's attention. A current legislator, African-American, smart, and unafraid to call out legal overreach in public during sessions and in open debates. She was turning legal transparency into a spectacle. Alito had remarked, "She's undermining public trust in the court." Thomas chimed in. Roberts, ever the strategist, paused briefly before asking, "Can we remove her from influencing anyone? Not from Congress, because that would require the Assembly to intervene, but from impact, from legitimacy, from the public eye." It all began with a dossier labeled "Misuse of Classified Evidence," a paper trail crafted just enough to appear authentic. Then came an internal review note, followed by an anonymous ethics complaint that was easy to leak but not formally filed. And then she got the envelope. Back in room 303, the questioning began. Judge Barrett leaned in. "You had confidential information during the session on July 12th regarding Eastern matters. Do you deny this?" Crockett stayed silent. Alito pressed on. "Did you receive documents from a whistleblower on a classified storage?" She tilted her head slightly. Gorsuch asked, "Legislator, were you aware that leaking classified material in a public session violates the national security protocol?" Still, Crockett said nothing. Instead, she reached into her jacket and pulled out a lone piece of paper. Gradually, deliberately, she set it down on the small table beside her. It was the exact classified document they accused her of leaking. The timestamp on the document showed July 10th, 2 full days before the session in question, but the details at the bottom told a different story. Last modified on July 15th. National Law Enforcement Intelligence Retrieval Group marked for review. Identifier authorized, unknown. She looked up, not angry, not flustered, just resolute, and asked one question. "Who authorized this?" No response, no movement. For the first time, the silence wasn't coming from her. A shift had occurred. The room hadn't changed, but the mood had. In less than 10 minutes, Crockett had gone from being the accused to the interrogator. Not with shouts, not with theatrics, but with calmness, clarity, and something far more dangerous to systems built on secrecy. Evidence. She relaxed in the cold metal chair, fingers lightly intertwined. "You said this session was about wrongdoing," she stated. "I agree, but you didn't invite me here to investigate mine. Judge Kavanaugh leaned forward. And what do you think this session is, legislator? She didn't blink. I think it's a reflection, and I think that reflection is starting to frighten you outside this room. Nobody knew this was happening, but the ripples of what was unfolding in room 303 wouldn't stay quiet for long, because this was more than just a clash between a legislator and the legal elite. It was the first shot of something larger, something more chaotic, something that couldn't be managed by attire, titles, or generations of tradition. A question had been posed, and the public, whether they realized it or not, was on the brink of becoming the deciders. There was a pause, the kind that empties, not fills. It made every gaze in the room flicker more slowly, every breath shallower. Jasmine Crockett had just rewritten the opening narrative of a highest court inquiry, not through grandstanding but simply by asking, "Who authorized this?" No judge replied because they couldn't. Acknowledging it would mean admitting one of two terrible truths. Either the document had been tampered with, or worse, someone within their ranks had tried to plant it. Either option was intolerable. Just then, as Thomas adjusted his glasses, Barrett shifted in her seat. Even Roberts, who rarely moved unless he had to, tapped his finger once against the wooden armrest. Crockett stayed quiet. She understood that the real danger lay not in what they were saying, but in what they wanted to say but couldn't. That's when the door behind her opened. A court employee stepped in, middle-aged, polished shoes, a generic look forged from years in the job. He whispered something in Chief Justice Roberts' ear. Roberts nodded once, then again, and said aloud, "We'll take a 10-minute break." Jasmine didn't budge, not immediately. She waited until every judge had stood and exited through the side doors, leaving her alone in the hall. The silence felt different now, not threatening, but anticipatory. She stood up, tucked the paper back into her binder, and turned to leave. That's when she noticed him, a janitor, bent over at one of the far corners of the room, pretending to clean the stone baseboard, but glancing at her once, then shifting his gaze away. He got up and wheeled his cart toward the exit. As they passed each other, he whispered so quietly she almost missed it. "Check the red binder." No more words, no backward glance. She walked out of the hall, down the corridor, and entered the nearest staff area. Inside her bag was the usual binder she brought to all sessions, but now something felt different. In the side pocket, she found it. A thin red plastic binder with no label. Inside was a dark memory stick, unbranded, attached to a single sticky note. No connections, no online storage, just truth. She plugged it into her offline laptop, the one she used solely for sensitive work. The screen lit up. Just one file. Highest Court Intelligence Exchanges. Protected by code. She blinked, then clicked in. Opened it. Messages, many of them. From personal accounts, from protected legal aliases, from internal network addresses labeled judges only. She skimmed through topics like curbing legislative overreach, strategy suggestions, information control, and regarding Crockett meetings, influence mapping, and this one from Roberts Juscom at secure.usg laws honorary at secure.net. Timestamp, July 3rd. Subject, the fire is spreading. If she keeps asking questions, she'll become the investigation. Her breath caught. The words echoed in her mind. Not a warning, but a choice. The file also contained records of planned secret meetings between judges and select legislative contributors. A preliminary note outlining ways to redefine oversight through legalese changes. Even session transcripts encoded but still clear discussing strategies to eliminate key legislative figures from public sessions. This wasn't just wrongdoing, it was collusion. It was a cold internal battle fought through procedure, silence, and the guise of judicial sanctity. And now she had the spark. 10 minutes later, the judges returned. One by one, they took their seats again. Roberts cleared his throat. "Let's continue," he said as if the break had been routine. But Crockett didn't sit down. She stayed right at the same seat, binder in hand, and asked, "Will this statement be part of the legislative record?" Judge Alito raised an eyebrow. "This isn't legislative, legislator. This is about a judicial ethics inquiry." She nodded. "Then let's make it both." She opened her binder, pulled out a copy of the most damaging message, the one with Roberts's name in that 7-word phrase. She placed it on the table and turned it to face them. "I have documents from your internal messages showing this session isn't about ethics. It's about silencing me." Judge Kagan frowned. "You're presenting taken evidence." Crockett's tone remained steady. "I received this without identification. I didn't steal it, but I plan to ask about it." Judge Gorsuch stepped forward. "Where did you get this?" She met his gaze. "I was given this by someone who maintains the surfaces you traverse." The sentence landed hard, because in a room filled with gowns and law, it served as a reminder. Truth doesn't ask for titles. The atmosphere thickened again, not cold, but heavy. Judge Sotomayor broke the silence. "Legislator Crockett," she said softly, "you understand these claims, if unfounded, could destroy public trust in the court." Jasmine replied, "I do, and if true," she didn't blink, "then the public's trust was misplaced from the start." From that moment on, the session was no longer procedural. It was philosophical, ethical, and fundamental. Because Crockett hadn't just put forth evidence, she had introduced doubt. Doubt not only in them, but in the entire architecture of unchecked judicial power. She put the court on trial, and whether the public knew it or not, they were already watching. Because in an age of digital whispers and anonymous contributors, silence never stays hidden for long. You can't help but feel the weight of a single report when it holds the magnitude of an entire country's inquiries. And outside room 303, something was stirring. Although the session wasn't being broadcast live, a static image had emerged of Crockett standing before 9 judges with their binders in hand, shared on a social platform simply called 9 Against 1. It became a hit in no time. In just 15 minutes, it was trending. By the end of the hour, it had turned into a movement. It started with whispers, then that static image, followed by 8 minutes of footage that changed everything. While Jasmine Crockett remained in room 303, facing 9 of the nation's most powerful legal minds, someone was recording. Illegally, yes, but when silence is used to hide the truth, breaking the law seems necessary. The footage was shaky, filmed from a device partially hidden behind a legal assistant's binder. It showed Judge Samuel Alito leaning slightly toward Judge Clarence Thomas. Their lips barely moved. The microphone was off, yet you could catch snippets of murmured conversation. She won't make it to re-election, just 8 terms. But in those 8 terms, a truth was revealed. This wasn't about morals, it was about removal. The clip hit the internet at 10:41 a.m. By 10:53, the phrase, "she won't reach re-election," was trending. By 11:12, a short video app was flooded with reaction clips. Young attorneys, former judges, law students in tears, even veterans quoting the Constitution. By noon, 2 hashtags dominated the nation. Sran against 1 and let her speak. One video, only 40 seconds long, showed a law professor from a historically black college moving around his office. When 9 unelected officials, regardless of their attire, start dictating the future of an elected lawmaker, that's not oversight. It's a soft form of dictatorship. It's structural betrayal masquerading as normalcy. Another clip featured a young Hispanic student from the Southwest saying, "My mom works in law, my brother's studying law, and today I saw an African-American woman standing alone before 9 judges and not backing down. We don't need live coverage to see what courage looks like." Then came the public reactions, swelling beyond courtrooms onto campuses, at bus stops, and hospitals. It wasn't just that they spread, they became passionate. This was no longer about rules, it was about power and who had the right to defy it. Inside room 303, the atmosphere shifted. Roberts sensed something was off. The aides outside the chamber were becoming agitated, with whispers rising. One aide was glued to their device, looking pale. Then a staffer slipped in to whisper in Roberts's ear. This time, he didn't raise a finger, he clenched his jaw. Crockett watched silently, no words needed. The public had entered the room without opening the door. Outside, by 12:30 p.m., hundreds had gathered. No signs, no shouting, at least not yet, just people standing, waiting. Someone held up a sign that read, "She speaks for us. Let her speak." A news network's legal team canceled its midday segment on monopoly business practices to run a breaking headline: "Private judicial meetings with lawmaker Crockett ignite nationwide outrage." A public affairs channel went live with analysis. A progressive outlet aired the 8-minute clip. Initially cautious, a conservative network showed the crowd forming outside, calling it unusual, yet peaceful. By 1 o'clock p.m., it was impossible to ignore. It was no longer an isolated story, it was a reckoning. Inside, Crockett held her ground. No drink, no lawyer, just her, the binder, and a country now relying on her silence. She pulled out a second document, this time not a message, but a reproduced statement from a former Supreme Court aide, certified and verified just 6 days earlier. "In many instances, I've witnessed secret meetings between current judges and private election advisors. These talks often happen before decisions that align suspiciously with donor interests." She read the statement aloud, slowly and deliberately. Each word felt like a chain link. Then she placed the document on the table, turning it towards the judges again. "Will anyone here dispute this?" she asked. Silence. Not even Roberts spoke. That's when she said it. 7 words that became more than a quote. They became a mirror reflection. "I'm not the observer. You are now." Someone caught it and spread it in a social post. It garnered 48,000 likes in the first 10 minutes. A creator in a southern city printed it on a shirt and offered it for free. A musician in the Midwest made it the title of an impromptu performance. A local religious leader in the Southeast kicked off his weekend sermon with it. By 2 o'clock p.m., it was woven into the public discourse like ink on paper. "I'm not the observer. You are now." Back in the room, things were deteriorating. Judge Roberts tried to regain control. "No media," he said. "This is turning into a spectacle." But Crockett didn't flinch. She looked straight at him, then down at her binder, waiting. Outside, murmurs began to grow. At first soft, then louder. "Let her speak. Let her speak." In a Texas city, a group of civil rights lawyers started a petition demanding a national investigation into judicial misconduct. In a northern city, law students began planning a nationwide walkout. In a western city, a coalition of former judges issued a rare joint statement. Justice is not optional. Silence is not neutral. The court is not above the people it serves. Even in the Capitol, something strange was happening. One of the nation's leading newspapers published an op-ed titled, "The Day the Court Became Smaller Than a Seat." It opened with a single line. They built the space, but she owned the room. By midday, the impact had morphed into a wave, and waves do not wait for permission to make a mark. Someone began a live stream outside the building. Thousands tuned in, then tens of thousands, then hundreds. Lawyers, activists, drivers, teens, veterans, all united by one phrase that dominated the broadcast discussion. "It's not 9 against 1 anymore." Back inside the chamber, Roberts looked up, his voice faltering for the first time all day. "Lawmaker Crockett, what do you want?" No smile, just a lean forward. "I want the same thing I wanted when I came in. Stop. For the truth to stop needing validation." At 3:07 p.m. Eastern Time, the first donation came in, $4.2 million, from a coalition of 12 non-profit legal support organizations, united under one name, Citizens Court Protection Resource. The name wasn't a coincidence. It sent a message to the court, to the nation, to every entity that believed silence could still be enforced through status and custom. A press release followed moments later. The Citizens Court Protection Resource has been established to ensure that no government official stands alone when the truth becomes inconvenient. This fund will cover all legal expenses for lawmaker Jasmine Crockett and any legislator penalized for fulfilling their constitutional duty of oversight. Then came the announcement that sent shockwaves through every courthouse in the Capitol. A major private bank, usually quiet and neutral, had just stepped in. By 3:21 p.m., news outlets were racing to confirm it. A news network verified the donation, while a progressive station displayed a breaking banner. A conservative network carefully discussed campaign finance within judicial matters, but that wasn't all. At 3:34 p.m., another gift was announced. $1 million from an anonymous donor, accompanied by a handwritten note. "I was taught to respect the court, but I was also taught to recognize fear when I see it. And today I saw 9 positions trembling before one seat." The image of that note on light stationery, no name, no logo, spread in less than 5 minutes. By 4:00 p.m., the financial tide had turned into a storm. People started donating not just millions, but whatever they could spare. $1742 from a former healthcare worker in the South, $28 from a high school debate team in the West, $5 from a homeless veteran in the Midwest who wrote, "She's fighting for folks who sit in places like me." Digital payment apps saw surges. Citizens Resource was right next to #LetHerSpeak. Then came the moment that shifted the entire political landscape. A coalition of small business owners in the Midwest purchased a full-page ad in a major newspaper. Black and white, no images, just one line. "This courtroom now belongs to the citizens." Back in room 303, Crockett remained steadfast. They had asked her what she wanted. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't struck the table, but her silence echoed louder than any gavel. She pulled out a third document, not a message, not a quote, but a chart. Simple, stark. It showed the voting patterns of 6 Supreme Court justices across 137 corporate-related cases over a decade, layered against their undisclosed private speaking fees and business connections. A red line ran through every link. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stated, "It's not illegal to be rich. It's immoral to be influenced by it while pretending you're not." Roberts exhaled through his nose. He knew this wasn't recoverable, not in the usual way things went. Usually, people broke down, got angry, became careless. But Crockett, she was calm and precise, and now the nation was watching. Outside, a new group arrived. Former soldiers, hundreds of them from every conflict since the major wars, not with weapons, but with wrapped banners. They lined the steps of the Supreme Court, each holding a picture of someone who had worn a uniform and died believing in a concept called equal justice under the law. They said nothing. They didn't have to. By 5:00 p.m., a public affairs channel started a special segment, "A Day Like No Other," when the Supreme Court became the accused. Legal experts debated whether the action was constitutional. Community organizations began drafting petitions. Former aides were quietly leaking background information, some confirming Crockett's evidence, others discreetly distancing themselves from hidden positions. The phrase, "judicial protection is not divinity," was now on banners across 50 cities, and one legal institution in an eastern city displayed a banner outside its main hallway. "She doesn't wear black, but she's restoring the robe." Inside the room, Judge Gorsuch made one last effort. "Lawmaker Crockett," he began, "you surely understand that example protects the court's independence from government retaliation." She replied, "Independence isn't the same as protection. Are you suggesting this court is no longer neutral?" Taking a slow breath, she added, "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just showing you the evidence. You might call it neutrality, but the public is starting to see it as a manipulation." Then, the moment arrived. A low buzz filled the air, not from her device, which had been turned off off long ago, but from the hallway, it felt like a collective breath, like a whole nation inhaling. Suddenly, the door unlocked and an assistant came in. She murmured something to Chief Judge Roberts for the third time that day. This time, he stood up. He didn't call for a pause or ask for order. He simply declared, "This meeting is concluded," and walked out. There was no authority in his departure, no elegance, just a sense of withdrawal. Crockett remained seated, waiting for the last person to leave the room. Then she gathered her papers, stood up, and turned to exit. But just before reaching the hallway, she set one final packet down on the table where they had questioned her. No label, no emblem, just 3 handwritten words in blue ink. For the records, beyond those closing doors, thousands were anticipating. She stepped out, not to applause, but to a respectful silence. One by one, former soldiers greeted her, and she acknowledged them with a hand over her heart. No words exchanged, no recording devices, just a mutual understanding that justice doesn't only exist in legal spaces. Sometimes it emerges from that first entrance, backed by a strong case and a fiery spirit. By 6 p.m., a new initiative was launched, the Crockett Principal Program, a grant program aimed at supporting law students dedicated to legal transparency, starting with 5 full scholarships. An hour later, a statement from a former government prosecutor gained traction, noting this was the first time she witnessed a woman of color not just challenging the legal establishment, but demanding its attention without seeking permission. That evening, news presenters across the political spectrum echoed the same sentiment. It started as 9 against 1, but grew into 330 million rising against the illusion of invincibility. In a quiet workspace in a Texas city, a picture of Crockett's father, now framed and recently polished, sat on her desk, the very image that had witnessed her unveil that packet just days earlier. This time, it watched as she placed a new document beside it, a replica of the memo from the unknown source. 5 lines, still no title, but now marked with the unmistakable sign that even in silence, truth gathers its allies. Unfairness, when confronted, only strengthens its defenders. By 7:45 p.m., Jasmine Crockett returned to her workspace. No security, no aides, just her. A binder filled with papers and a computer disconnected from the internet. She hadn't eaten, not because she forgot, but because she couldn't break her concentration. What began as a quiet session had transformed into a national conversation. But Crockett wasn't looking for noise. She was hunting for patterns. And now, with the legal arena behind her, she could focus on something even the judges hadn't seen coming. An African nation. Months earlier, during a late-night brief about global educational funding, she had noticed a strange pattern of transactions involving a U.S. charity and various student organizations in East Africa. At first glance, it seemed like philanthropy, safe, honorable even, but something kept nagging at her, something hidden in the foundation of those grants. The amounts were oddly consistent, $275,000 each, always spaced exactly 91 days apart. The names of the recipients changed, but the financial identifiers remained the same. Most importantly, the signatures on the authorizations were familiar. At that time, she couldn't prove it, not then. But now she had more than a suspicion. She had the missing document. It came from a sealed envelope placed on her desk right after the meeting. No sender, no message, just a flash drive with a single printed page. The drive contained nothing but data tables. But that page? It was a funding authorization from the Organization for Legal Youth Empowerment, a nonprofit registered in a southern state. And at the bottom, boldly stamped, was a signature, Clarence Thomas. She matched it against 5 other documents in her possession, all bearing the same pressure points, style, and blue ink thickness. It was real. But what made it damning wasn't just the signature, it was the financial institution involved, a political consulting firm based in a Florida city operating under the category of advisory services and election strategies. The money wasn't going to an educational institution. It was being funneled to a political entity, a firm that had orchestrated dark online campaigns during midterm elections aimed at undermining legislative oversight. Now, Crockett had the documentation trail. At 8:12 p.m., she initiated a secure video call with 3 individuals, a financial investigator based in Europe, a journalist from a British outlet, and a former government justice official turned whistleblower who had once been tasked with investigating foreign political donations. She showed them the dossier. The investigator's response was immediate. This isn't just unethical, it's organized laundering. And worse, it's self-perpetuating. The creator and the recipient are part of the same protection scheme. The reporter leaned in. And you're telling me that authorization comes from a current Supreme Court justice? Crockett nodded. No. I'm telling you it's one of them. The justice contact exhaled sharply. You need to tread carefully. If you go public with this, it's not just a political battle, it's a structural collapse. They'll come after you in a roundabout way. But Crockett had already faced worse. She had felt it in whispers, behind closed doors, when 9 people thought she stood alone. This was no longer about them. It was about what the American public deserved to see and what they were beginning to realize, that behind every stone edifice, there might be a hidden entrance. By 9:03 p.m., Crockett was back in front of cameras. cameras. This time, it was a live stream. No edits, no rewrites, just her and the dossier. She held up the page. "This," she began, "is not about generosity. It's about concealment." She paused. "You've seen me stand before 9 judges, but you haven't witnessed what they hoped no one would ask about." She read the document slowly aloud, then flipped it over. Behind the page, she revealed the wire transfer. She underscored the name of the political consulting firm. "Explain to me how a grant translates into a political payment. Tell me why a sitting justice approves routing educational grants to campaign agencies registered under protection laws in Florida." Leaning in, her voice firm, she added, "I'm not asking the court to answer. I'm asking the public to pay attention." Within 5 minutes, the segment had been captured and reshared across social media, short video apps, video sharing platforms, and photo sharing sites. By 9:12 p.m., legal content creators were already reacting in real time. By 9:17 p.m., a new hashtag began trending. Hashtag not a grant or protection. Then came the responses from the African nation. Reporters from a local outlet verified that the alleged recipient institutions had never existed. The locations were vacant buildings or P.O. boxes. The funds had disappeared. No students had been enrolled. Then the kicker came. The political firm in Florida, its registered owner was married to the relative of a government circuit court judge appointed by Clarence Thomas himself in 2007. The network was unraveling, and this time Crockett didn't have to say much because others were doing it for her. At 10 p.m., a progressive commentator brought on a former government judge who had previously worked under Thomas. He held the document up live on air. "Either this authorization is forged, and someone within the Supreme Court is creating false documents to impersonate a judge, or it's legitimate, and we're witnessing the most severe breach of legal ethics in U.S. history. Either way, this isn't a court. It's a syndicate in robes." Across the nation, the response surged faster than anyone expected. In a western city, citizens gathered outside the federal courthouse with laptops sharing the dossiers. In an eastern city, community organizers held late-night seminars on legal accountability. In a northeastern city, a coalition of legal educators filed a swift ethics complaint to the Legislative Oversight Committee. The complaint was just a single paragraph long. "We, the undersigned, demand an immediate legislative investigation into the laundering of foreign and domestic funds under the guise of legal philanthropy." Attached is Exhibit A. Exhibit A was the dossier Jasmine Crockett had raised, the one signed by Clarence Thomas, the one that had made the Supreme Court tremble beneath its stone facade. At 10:42 p.m., a news channel broke into its normal programming with a shocking headline: "Crockett links an African nation to Florida in a legal funding scandal." Then came a twist no one was expecting. The political solutions firm in Florida suddenly took down its website. The company's registration status changed to awaiting closure, and its listed phone number vanished within the hour. It was alarming, to say the least. At 11 o'clock p.m., Crockett sent out one final message for the night. It was just text on a dark background, no sound. "This isn't an announcement, it's a highlight, and what it reveals is for all of us." Then she disconnected. But the nation remained alert because once reality steps into legal affairs, it doesn't ask for permission, it just enters, and it doesn't wait to be invited. By 7:02 a.m. the next morning, the courtroom had transformed from a mere symbol into a fortress. Barriers lined the stairs, and law enforcement gathered closely. The doors were shut tight. Security scrutinized every corner, not because of imminent danger, but because of a palpable presence. Over 125,000 people had gathered overnight, bringing tents, signs, and stories. Some carried legal documents, others brought drinks, a few had their kids, yet they all shared one phrase deep in their hearts, the words Crockett had recorded just hours earlier. "This isn't an announcement, it's a highlight." Across the country, universities canceled classes to hold discussions. Places of worship opened their doors, not for prayer, but for dialogue. Information hubs extended their hours for anyone eager to read every word of the documents Crockett had released. No headline could contain the magnitude of it all anymore. No journalist could keep up with the pace. Then, at 7:26 a.m., a news outlet confirmed it. The Supreme Court had indefinitely postponed the next phase of the hearing. The phrase "indefinitely postponed" set off a firestorm online. People rallied behind the idea of making her voice heard once more. So did the keywords "court" and "withdrawal" as a new message appeared on the newsfeed from an anonymous group. Postponement isn't justice. Alone in her office, Crockett had no staff, no conversations, just a binder with one phrase on the cover for the public. It wasn't symbolic, it was straightforward. Inside were 34 documents about financial transactions, meeting records, and authorization studies, all tied to the legal funding that had originated in an African nation and spanned to Florida and the federal government. But Jasmine wasn't rushed. She knew that truth wasn't just in the documents, it was in the delivery. At exactly 9 o'clock a.m., she left her office, not with a team, not with cameras, just herself, the same way she entered room 303 2 days earlier. But this time, the nation walked with her. As she approached the court, the crowd parted. There were no cheers, no shouts, just a collective understanding that the outcome was already known. They anticipated anticipated not just justice, but its revelation. Jasmine climbed the stone stairs slowly, holding the binder in one hand. In her other hand, nothing. No device, no sound, just her voice. Then the moment arrived. She stopped, turned to the crowd, and simply said, "The hearing may be closed, but justice doesn't lock its doors. Not today." Then she walked to the main entrance. It didn't open. Security blocked her path, but that didn't stop her. She remained there on the steps, legs crossed, composed, and pulled out the dossier marked for the public. Inside the courtroom, Chief Judge Roberts was at the edge of the main hall, watching the live feed. Yes, someone had leaked it again. An assistant, maybe a staff member, but the footage was clear. Jasmine Crockett was out there, unfolding documents one by one, recording her voice without any theatrics, just facts. Her words echoed through the hall, even without amplification. This isn't a courtroom anymore. It's a reflection. Let the nation see. The silence within was louder than any gavel. Judge Kavanaugh turned off his screen. Judge Barrett left the room. Roberts stayed still. For the first time in his role as chief judge, he didn't have a ruling to announce or a legal framework to refer to, because this wasn't about law anymore. It was about legacy. Meanwhile, Jasmine kept reading. She laid out 12 unexplained wire transfers, 4 suspicious security firms, 3 matching timestamps between court records and election dates, and one name connected to it all, Clarence Thomas. She never spoke his name, but the nation already understood. Then at 10:43 a.m., something unexpected happened. A public affairs station broke its own routine and began broadcasting the complete coverage, uncensored, unedited. For the first time in history, the steps of the Supreme Court became the platform for public oversight. The feed was picked up by public radio, then public television, and even by a conservative network that called it a foundational moment. Crockett reached the last page, a legal letter that had been kept secret from a former aide who had fled the nation. It read, "I tried to report the abuse. I was told, this isn't your problem, but I served this system for 12 years. I saw it lose its purpose, so I entrust this to someone who hasn't forgotten hers." Jasmine looked up and declared, "I am not your problem, but the people always should be." The crowd erupted, not in noise, but in action. They began to move not away from the courthouse, but toward it, calm and collected, a silent march. At 11:07 a.m., an urgent press release came from legislative oversight. Given the amount of evidence presented outside formal legal processes, they announced they would initiate an urgent investigation into legal misconduct, financial entanglements, and potential obstruction of foundational oversight. They dubbed it the Crockett Initiative. At 11:35 a.m., Chief Judge Roberts entered a secure discussion with senior legal advisors. He asked just one question: what happens if we don't respond? The answer came back: then the people will write the narrative themselves. And out on the steps, Crockett stood up. She closed the binder, looked at the emblem of the court, and uttered one last thought, nearly a whisper: "This isn't mine to fix, but it's ours to confront." Then she took her steps down the staircase. Each step was a piece, each silence a statement, each breath a nation finally exhaling. At 12:01 p.m., the top of the U.S. Capitol cast a new kind of shadow, not just over the national grounds, but over the entire system. Inside, phones rang in every office. Voters, staff, former judges, veterans, single parents, government employees. Everyone reached out with one message: we're done observing. What are you doing? By 12:17 p.m., legislative leaders convened an urgent meeting. It was unscheduled, unannounced, just 73 members from various parties entering room 226 of the Capitol with files, mobile devices, and voices they hadn't used in years. In the center of the room, a single screen played Crockett's live broadcast on loop. No sound, just her turning pages, reciting evidence, standing on those steps as if it were a throne made for reality. A Texas lawmaker murmured, "She's done more from those steps than most of us have achieved from here." At 12:44 p.m., a resolution was made, a simple one-page document. This assembly acknowledges the emerging evidence of legal wrongdoing and commits its full support for a formal investigation into the ethical, financial, and foundational actions of members of the United States Supreme Court. They called it a House resolution, the Public Reflection Act. The title wasn't random. It was taken straight from Crockett's words. This isn't a legal arena, it's a reflection. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, something shifted. A man in robes walked by. He wasn't a judge anymore, just a retired higher court judge, but the robes still fit. He stood silently by the crowd, then took off the garment, folded it neatly, placed it on the ground, and walked away. No words, no actions, just a gesture, simple yet powerful. In less than an hour, 7 more former judges joined him, then 10. By 2:00 p.m., the act of removing robes became a national event. Legal scholars recorded their own interpretations. Educators held symbolic gatherings. Even a courthouse janitor in a Midwestern state was spotted folding a dark cloth and laying it under the courthouse emblem with a note: "Until this place earns it back." Back at the Supreme Court, cracks began to show. Judge Sotomayor requested a private meeting with Roberts. Judge Kagan followed suit. They weren't lodging complaints, they were asking questions. How did this happen? Why weren't we informed? Are we sure we're on the right side of history? For the first time since the court was established, the focus shifted from law to legacy. Meanwhile, in Crockett's office,
office, something new was on the horizon. An unexpected visitor arrived. No recording devices, no identification. He came from the Global Justice Network. He handed her a sealed binder with a handwritten note. If your nation won't amplify your voice, others will raise it. They proposed forming the first ever Global Justice Support Alliance with Crockett as the founding leader. The mission was to provide legal funding for underrepresented groups worldwide, rural, displaced, and marginalized folks who had been denied a voice. And in bold red ink, supported by 14 countries, an initial commitment of $6.1 million. Crockett smiled faintly, grabbed a blank page, wrote 4 words on it, not just for me, and placed it in the binder. Meanwhile, the crowd was growing again, not louder, just bigger. Healthcare workers in scrubs, underground artists, tech workers, agricultural laborers. No one questioned why they came. Everyone already understood. It was no longer about sides. It was about right and wrong. And finally, the question had shifted from, can we trust the system?
At 10:42 p.m., a news channel broke into its normal programming with a shocking headline. Crockett links an African nation to Florida in a legal funding scandal. Then came a twist no one was expecting. The political solutions firm in Florida suddenly took down its website. The company's registration status changed to awaiting closure, and its listed phone number vanished within the hour. It was alarming, to say the least. At 11 o'clock p.m., Crockett sent out one final message for the night. It was just text on a dark background, no sound. This isn't an announcement, it's a highlight, and what it reveals is for all of us. Then she disconnected. But the nation remained alert, because once reality steps into legal affairs, it doesn't ask for permission, it just enters, and it doesn't wait to be invited. By 7:02 a.m. the next morning, the courtroom had transformed from a mere symbol into a fortress. Barriers lined the stairs, and law enforcement gathered closely. The doors were shut tight. Security scrutinized every corner, not because of imminent danger, but because of a palpable presence. Over 125,000 people had gathered overnight, bringing tents, signs, and stories. Some carried legal documents, others brought drinks, a few had their kids, yet they all shared one phrase deep in their hearts, the words Crockett had recorded just hours earlier. This isn't an announcement, it's a highlight. Across the country, universities canceled classes to hold discussions. Places of worship opened their doors, not for prayer, but for dialogue. Information hubs extended their hours for anyone eager to read every word of the documents Crockett had released. No headline could contain the magnitude of it all anymore. No journalist could keep up with the pace. Then, at 7:26 a.m., a news outlet confirmed it. The Supreme Court had indefinitely postponed the next phase of the hearing. The phrase indefinitely postponed set off a firestorm online. People rallied behind the idea of making her voice heard once more. So did the keywords court and withdrawal, as a new message appeared on the newsfeed from an anonymous group. Postponement isn't justice. Alone in her office, Crockett had no staff, no conversations, just a binder with one phrase on the cover for the public. It wasn't symbolic, it was straightforward. Inside were 34 documents about financial transactions, meeting records, and authorization studies, all tied to the legal funding that had originated in an African nation and spanned to Florida and the federal government. But Jasmine wasn't rushed. She knew that truth wasn't just in the documents, it was in the delivery. At exactly 9 o'clock a.m., she left her office, not with a team, not with cameras, just herself, the same way she entered room 303 2 days earlier. But this time, the nation walked with her. As she approached the court, the crowd parted. There were no cheers, no shouts, just a collective understanding that the outcome was already known. They anticipated not just justice, but its revelation. Jasmine climbed the stone stairs slowly, holding the binder in one hand. In her other hand, nothing. No device, no sound, just her voice. Then the moment arrived. She stopped, turned to the crowd, and simply said, "The hearing may be closed, but justice doesn't lock its doors. Not today." Then she walked to the main entrance. It didn't open. Security blocked her path, but that didn't stop her. She remained there on the steps, legs crossed, composed, and pulled out the dossier marked for the public. Inside the courtroom, Chief Judge Roberts was at the edge of the main hall, watching the live feed. Yes, someone had leaked it again. An assistant, maybe a staff member, but the footage was clear. Jasmine Crockett was out there, unfolding documents one by one, recording her voice without any theatrics, just facts. Her words echoed through the hall, even without amplification. This isn't a courtroom anymore. It's a reflection. Let the nation see. The silence within was louder than any gavel. Judge Kavanaugh turned off his screen. Judge Barrett left the room. Roberts stayed still. For the first time in his role as chief judge, he didn't have a ruling to announce or a legal framework to refer to, because this wasn't about law anymore. It was about legacy. Meanwhile, Jasmine kept reading. She laid out 12 unexplained wire transfers, 4 suspicious security firms, 3 matching timestamps between court records and election dates, and one name connected to it all, Clarence Thomas. She never spoke his name, but the nation already understood. Then at 10:43 a.m., something unexpected happened. A public affairs station broke its own routine and began broadcasting the complete coverage, uncensored, unedited. For the first time in history, the steps of the Supreme Court became the platform for public oversight. The feed was picked up by public radio, then public television, and even by a conservative network network that called it a foundational moment. Voices joined in, from both sides, people across the country. Some had memos, others spoke from the heart, but the message was clear. If the court won't investigate itself, we will. At 8:12 a.m., the vote passed. 342 in favor, 87 against, 6 abstained. The largest bipartisan vote to investigate the highest court in U.S. history. The vote granted the Assembly Control Room full authority to access internal court financial records, to request independent audits, and to call current judges for public questioning. At the very top of the list, Clarence Thomas. The news spread quickly. Outside the government building, people celebrated, not like fans at a sports event, but like citizens finally being heard. At the foot of a big statue, someone shouted, "It's happening! It's finally happening!" Kids on school trips looked up at history, not in books, but in real time. At 9:05 a.m., Crockett faced the press. No smile, just focus. She held up a new binder, this one labeled not for the public, but for official records. She revealed it. Inside was an official document from a former budget compliance assistant. The paper was stamped, time-stamped, verified, and explosive. "I was ordered to reclassify travel expenses linked to Judge Thomas as educational allowances. When I asked for clarification, my boss told me, if you want to keep your job, now's not the time to be a hero. Now I choose to be one." Her title, former budget compliance expert. Her final words, "This isn't bravery, it's realignment." By 10 o'clock a.m., the whistleblower was live in the Assembly Control Room. Emotion in her eyes, honesty in her voice. They made it difficult to tell the truth, but they forgot we've been carrying it for ages. She brought files, storage devices, documents, inner notes that were never meant to see the light. And with every paper unsealed, the walls cracked a little more. Then came the moment that chilled every legal space in America. Among the papers was a communication record time-stamped the day before the payment to an African nation was awarded. It showed a multi-party conversation, a current judge, an election consultant, and a figure listed simply as lead authorization confirmed. Judge Roberts hadn't just been aware, he had sanctioned it. At 11:37 a.m., the Assembly leader called an emergency meeting, not for discussion, but for action. "We will not delay, we will not evade, and we will not be silenced." The Assembly moved to propose the establishment of a special committee on legal corruption. Last time something like this was created? Never. It hadn't been necessary until now. A public affairs channel interrupted regular programming. Headlines read like bold stories. Crockett files spark major upheaval. Highest court under investigation. Nation watches the system tremble. Whistleblower. I chose to be the hero. Across the globe, cities lit up American diplomatic buildings with one phrase in bright letters. Let the nation see. At noon, Jasmine Crockett returned to the steps of the highest court. She said nothing for a long moment, just stood there, then slowly placed the binder marked for records on the top step and said, "This country entrusted me with the law. The people placed their faith in me, and the system tried to make me choose between them." She looked straight into the camera. "I didn't choose. I carried both because the law means nothing if the people don't believe in it." The crowd behind her didn't cheer. They stood quietly, respectfully present, and right before she turned to leave, someone in the crowd murmured one phrase, soft, but it spread like fire. "Justice doesn't wear robes." Someone else finished it. It continued. At 6 o'clock a.m. the next morning, the stone steps of the highest court were empty for the first time in 4 days. No banners, no shouting, no live coverage, just the peaceful sound of air brushing over the rocks with a binder still resting on the top step. No one dared to move it. It belonged to more than one person now. It belonged to the nation. By 7:32 a.m., the legislature was back in session, and this time there were no debates, no discussions, and no second guessing. The Crockett Law passed. For the first time in U.S. history, it created a cross-party oversight panel, mandated annual financial transparency reports for all judges, allowed for live broadcasts of court proceedings, set term limits for future judges, and most importantly, included a key provision. Any judge intentionally misleading the legislature or the public would face immediate scrutiny from the oversight panel and could be removed by a majority vote. The court would no longer be a solitary, untouchable entity. It would be held accountable, just like everyone else. At 8:15 a.m., the news dropped. Judge Clarence Thomas was stepping down. His resignation letter was a simple statement. "I served the foundational document. Now I withdraw so it may be served better." An hour later, Chief Justice John Roberts called for a public appearance before the oversight group. It was voluntary, unprecedented, and unavoidable. But Jasmine Crockett was not in the Capitol. At 10:02 a.m., a lone camera crew caught her in a public space near a Texas city, planting a tree. No press release, no colleagues, no podium, just a pair of gardening gloves a trowel, and a small marker in the ground, honoring those who spoke out when silence was easier. A reporter approached her and asked, "Lawmaker, what's next?" She paused and replied simply, "Now I go home. I respond to contacts. I check on community initiatives. I read messages from people who never made the news. I don't wait for authority. I wait for someone else to step up when the next silence needs breaking." Later that day, she returned to her office. On her desk was a package, no return address, no label. Inside was a well-worn, leather-bound volume, the U.S. Constitution, and on the inside cover, a handwritten note. "You didn't rewrite it. You reminded us how to interpret it again." At 5 p.m., she made her final statement of the day. No live broadcast, just a solitary post online. Dark letters on a light background read, "I didn't wear a suit. I didn't stand behind a podium, but I carried the weight, and I didn't carry it alone." In smaller print, it added, "Justice doesn't wear garments. It moves forward." That evening, lights were lit on courthouse steps across all 50 states. Some prayed, some wept, while others simply stood in silence, not out of sadness, but out of healing. In a Midwestern state, a retired custodian read Crockett's statement aloud to his grandchildren. In a northern state, a community leader translated it into a native language. In a New York neighborhood, students painted murals of her final words on brick walls. In a small town in the South, the children of a formerly silenced informant stood outside her school and declared, "I want to learn the law, not to join the system, but to make sure it remembers who it serves." Weeks turned into months, and something had shifted, not just in legislation, but in the collective consciousness. Courtrooms no longer felt like fortresses. They felt like the places they were meant to be, spaces where people came not to beg, but to be heard. Somewhere in a quiet Texas office, Jasmine Crockett sat without recording devices or headlines, just letters, thousands of them, from truck drivers, teachers, veterans, and women who had once been silenced. Each one ended with some version of the same message. "You didn't just safeguard the law, you safeguarded us." And she would murmur back to no one in particular, "That's what justice is for." 2 weeks passed, and something unusual happened. People stopped asking, "What did Crockett say?" and began asking, "What are we doing now?" Because the shift wasn't just political, it was social. Changes began to ripple through court systems nationwide. Judges who once ruled from behind closed doors now held open meetings with live broadcasts. Employees were empowered to raise concerns without fear of retaliation. Legal institutions revamped their curriculums, adding sections on legal ethics, community accountability, and the Crockett Principle. Yes, that's what students started calling it. More than a law, it was a mindset. Ask questions even when they tell you not to. Challenge authority without fear. Silence is not neutral, it's intentional. In a northern city, a group of community activists launched a program called For the Record. In a southern city, civil rights lawyers began hosting weekly community legal forums called Stairs of Justice, held right on the courthouse steps. In a western city, murals went up depicting Crockett in her jacket, her folder, and her silence, not as a fighter, but as a mirror. Every mural featured the same bright lettering. "This is not a courtroom, it's a reflection." But the most significant change didn't come from the Capitol. It emerged from a small community in the South. An elderly female judge, retiring after 4 decades, delivered her last ruling from the steps, not from the bench. She said, "I once thought justice came from the top down. She reminded me it starts from the ground up." She removed her robe, folded it, and placed it on the steps, not in shame, but in honor. Then she added, "Don't name a law after her. Name your actions after her." And throughout it all, Jasmine Crockett remained quiet. No press agreements, no interviews, no tours, just local work. Responding to messages, submitting proposals. A banner above her workspace simply stated, "Voters first, always." But across the nation, something lingered in the air. A new standard, a fresh courage, a renewed demand, not just for justice, but for a reality that didn't need garments to be acknowledged. 3 months later, summer arrived in the Capitol. With it came a strange stillness, not silence nor inactivity, but a moment to breathe, to step back, to reflect. Jasmine Crockett had forced the nation to confront itself and ask, what did we see? Across the country, tangible changes had taken root. Oversight groups became the norm. Whistleblowers were protected, not punished. Transparency was no longer optional, it was expected. The gowns still hung in the halls, but their meaning had shifted. Not authority, not tradition, but obligation. Yet through it all, Crockett never claimed the spotlight. In fact, she turned down most interviews, declined a national award, and politely passed on an invitation to be the face of a new political campaign. She said this was never about being someone else's symbol. It was about refusing to be their silence. Then one morning, she received a message. No return address, no sender, just one line written in blue ink on a plain envelope from someone who had never voted until now. Inside was a torn sheet from a notebook. It highlighted the first change written in ink. Below it was a handwritten handwritten note. I dropped out of school at 15. I've been in and out of shelters. I never thought this system had a place for someone like me, but I saw you sit in that metal chair across from the most powerful people in this country, and you didn't flinch. You didn't shout. You just asked them the questions they didn't want to answer. That day, I learned that respect can speak louder than anger. And maybe if someone like you can stand there without falling apart, someone like me can step up and participate. No name, just the last line. Thank you for reminding me that justice belongs to the people, not the robes. Jasmine folded the note and tucked it into a small wooden box she kept under her desk next to a picture of her father and her bar ID. No awards, no accolades, just paper, ink, memory. That day, she left her office quietly. No announcement, no press. She walked past the government building, past the water's edge, past the court's stone steps. She didn't stop or look back because she understood. Justice doesn't need a podium, it needs movement. On her way home, she passed a freshly painted mural featuring two kids standing atop a stack of law books, gazing at the steps of justice. Beneath it were four simple words: keep asking questions. She smiled, not because the work was done, but because the silence had ended. For the first time in a long while, the nation was learning to listen, not to authority, but to truth, to the citizens who don't shout, who don't seek recognition, who don't wear robes but still push forward, one step at a time, one truth at a time, one question at a time. Because in the end, that's what this story was about. Not just a courtroom, not just a seat or a binder or a live broadcast or a title, but about a single truth. Justice isn't what you wear, it's what you refuse to stay silent about. And sometimes it moves quietly, boldly, uninvited, but exactly when we need